morning, everybody. Hi, it's Ken Phelan, your friendly neighborhood Gotham CTO, and I'm here this morning for our monthly CTO Tech Talk. And our guest today is Charles Blauner, back for his second appearance on the Gotham. Thank you, Charles, for your second appearance on the Gotham Tech Talk.
Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, nice. Well, it's because I talk to you all the time, so I figured like everyone else should enjoy some of that, some of that Charles wisdom as well. So we have a great agenda today, talking about some of the things that you do in the VC community and what you see is coming up as innovations and what some of the needs are. But I felt, a desire to at least like pay some homage to what's in the news, and I'm getting asked all the time about what's going on with Ukraine, what should cyber professionals be doing. And honestly, to the extent, I think to some extent there's a little bit of like almost like cyber fatigue that I think the customers are hearing from everyone all the time about these things to buy. I mean, so what are you advising the many people that you advise about actions to take based on what's going on in the world right now?
So it breaks up into two camps, all right? So some of my clients actually have operations in Russia and Ukraine, and that's a whole different conversation. It's amazing how much outsourced IT software development was happening in Russia and Ukraine. And while most of it's still happening in Russia, do you want it to happen? And none of it is happening in Ukraine because obviously people are distracted. But with clients in general, what I really say, honestly, it's more of the same, but it's a question of intensity. All right. The focus on hygiene is still going to be the same. The reality is all the tools the Russians are using to go after the Ukrainians, all the tools the Ukrainians are using to go after the Russians, and all the hackers who are doing whatever in between, 99% of it still exploits either unpatched vulnerabilities or stupid humans. That's true today. It's always been true. The challenge today is that the threat environment is just much more intense. So you just have to be that much more focused on all the basics that you needed to focus on before, I think is the most important thing. If you've got the ability to and the time to, especially you are a global firm, you've got to be thinking about network segmentation. How do you isolate and build sort of levels of containment in your network? And think about it with a geographic perspective, maybe more so than you might have historically have done. Historically, you might have thought of it more on a business line perspective, maybe, but geopolitics will be the number one threat driver in the near term, and so that has to become more of a consideration as you think about segmentation strategies. The truth is, if you haven't thought about segmentation strategies, there's nothing you're going to do in the near term, all right? You're not going to go out and buy a product and deploy it in your environment and get anything out of it quickly. But if you've already got it and you're sort of figuring out how to prioritize, let this help you prioritize.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it's always this question of, I think, during any crisis, there's a similarly with the start of COVID, there's, a crisis is probably a bad time to launch into a whole new thing. Like it's either you have some of these things or you don't. So the beginning question, the beginning pragmatist in me is like, okay, so what do you have now and how can you more effectively use it? Like I like your idea about just raising awareness and getting more on top of your patching, getting more on top of, sending out, I told everyone, send out an email to your users. So this is the wrong time to click on dumb stuff. Just be extra aware as a user during this time. But I think at the same time, there's always this feeling that like, well, and I've heard many of CISOs say like, we'll never waste a good crisis. Right. So like if your board's nervous and your board's coming to you and saying, what can we do? What can we do? You could say, well, remember when I gave you a budget for X and you said spend 80% of X? Like, can we have the other 20%? Because that long term, there's ways to stay safe.
Yes, I will agree with that. And in some cases and in some places, maybe even if you were not even asking for critical things, maybe the things you're going to have the courage to ask for now, and there'll be more board receptivity. I think the interesting challenge, though, is that board receptivity, I think, has really sort of gone up in the last year and a half already, just because of all of the ransomware attacks and how public they've been.
Right.
If your board didn't start to care with all of that, unless there's a direct exposure to Ukraine, Russia in your business, I'm not hopeful that you'd have dramatically more success now. You could try, but the reality is, from a risk perspective, this is just a heightening of that ransomware risk, that resiliency risk that really started to percolate 2 years ago.
True. All right, so let's go back to what we were originally scheduled to talk about, which was you do this awesome thing, and I want you to kind of explain it a little bit about. I think a lot of people I talk to in the industry, what they really want to do is like kind of get on the product side, the innovation side. Like they've got great ideas and they want to, get out to that space and work on boards and work with products. And that's a little bit, I think, what you do. So I know you work with this Teammate, and maybe you could explain like what Teammate is, what your role is there, and just paint a picture about, sort of that part of your work portfolio.
Sure. So I guess most people know me for like being a CISO for 20 plus years in banking. But since I sort of stepped away from being operational, and God bless all of you who are on the call that are still operational, part of what I do now is I'm an operating partner and the CISO in residence at Teammate. Teammate is an Israeli-based venture capital company. It started in 2014. It's actually really unique in venture capital in that it actually really started as a foundry. It started as a foundry where they build companies from scratch. I first met them in 2014, and I actually became an early customer of one of their early companies. Since then, they've evolved now, in addition to be a foundry in cyber and big data. They have established a Fintech Foundry, and they also have established a more traditional venture capital fund that does sort of Series A and seed level investments. And so that gives us, through all these things, it gives us a really large perspective on what's happening in the cyberspace.
Right. So what's the difference between a foundry and a venture capital firm? What is
a foundry? So a venture capital firm is you come to me and you say, I want a little bit of money to help me build a company that I'm building. All right. And you're going to get a bit of money from 3 or 4 different people, and they will all have equity in yourself. And you will go off on your own and build the company. In a foundry, you come and say, I have an idea. Will you help me build a company? And for the first 6 months or so, you are technically an employee of the foundry while we're helping you build out and validate the idea for the company. And if you get through our process, we then go with you to raise a seed round where we will have a primary stake from a venture perspective, but we'll bring other investors in. But so that's the big difference. One is you grow the company from an idea. The other is you just help invest in the company. Good VCs also help grow the companies, but some VCs just give you money. Now, one of the interesting things a Teammate got involved in a couple of years ago is a lot of you, and I know the stock market is just a flaming pile of trash right now, but for last few years, one of the big things that has emerged in the stock markets are ETFs, exchange traded funds. And you'll hear if you ever watch CNBC, you'll see lots of advertisements for QQQ and all sorts of other exchange traded funds. You have them that follow the NASDAQ, the S&P, but you also have exchange traded funds that follow specific industries. You'll have a chemical ETF, you'll have an ESG ETF. Over the last couple of years, a number of different fund managers created cyber funds. Team 8 was approached by one of these companies. It's called Wisdom Tree. They do a whole bunch of funds and said, we want to do a cyber fund, but we want to do it smarter than just looking at the financials. We want some expertise thinking about what does a cyber expert think is important in how companies are going to change and grow and the like. And so we decided to do this with them. And as part of that, we developed a set of themes, all right? And we first published a report in 2021 with our 7 themes that are driving the future of cybersecurity. And just a week or 2 ago, we published the 2022 report. And what we do internally is we use these themes and we rate every publicly traded cyber relevant company in the world. And we give Wisdom Tree our ratings, and that is part of their input in how they build their ETF. And we re-rate the companies every 6 months as part of Wisdom Tree's rebalancing of the portfolio. And so that's a little bit about what we're doing, a little bit about Team 8 and Foundries.
So you're looking for things that are important, or or is it more about like it's something you're looking also for like growth areas, like places where there are needs that are sort of under met, if you will,
we're looking for the things that we think will be driving growth. All right. All the areas that we're looking at thematically are experiencing growth. Some of them at a different pace. But what we did was say, what are the themes that we think will drive revenue growth for these companies? So that if they have products in this space, we think this is a growing space, and thus their revenue is likely to grow, which means their share value is likely to grow. All right. So for example, let's take our number 1 theme this year, as was last year, is cloud security. All right. And so if you are a publicly traded company and the core of your portfolio is around the topic of cloud security, you will get a high rating on that theme for that company. All right. And so, and maybe it would help to better understand and better answer your question, Ken, if I just sort of list out our 7 themes. Sure, so you get a better sense.
Yep,
right?
Okay.
So as I mentioned, our number 1 theme this year and last year is cloud security. Number 2 theme is smarter security. Number 3 theme this year is resiliency and recovery. Resiliency and recovery was a theme last year as well. It was not as highly rated as it is this year. The number 4 theme is security of things. The number 5 theme is the perimeterless world. The number 6 theme is data security. Now, I will say this is the only thematic change between 2021 and 2022 for us at Team 8. Last year, this theme focused specifically on privacy. This year, we made a choice that was most likely too narrow a definition. And so we expanded it more broadly to talk about data security. So you can think, for example, the legacy DLP products would fit into a data security theme. We wouldn't necessarily think of legacy DLP products, though, as a growth area. Right. And then the last theme is shift left. All right. So those are the themes. And then we look at all the different companies and say, okay, Palo Alto, okay, you are at the top of the class in 3 themes. Okta, you're here, you're there, whoever. And so that's the basics of it.
So, I mean, how do you look at like cloud security and decide like what's interesting? I mean, I think like cloud security is a complicated subject. I mean, on some level, everything that exists also exists in the cloud. So it's a conversation about securing everything. And I've seen some motions, I think, over the last year. Like from my perspective, I think, when I was talking to customers 3 or 4 years ago, it was about this complicated cloud stack. Let's say that's not happening anymore, but I see like more of a motion towards the more encompassing umbrellas, like the Wiz and Orcas of the world. But I mean, so like, how do you? I mean, so cloud security, but like how, like, what, from your perspective, like what makes cloud security interesting or not interesting?
So, I mean, part of the method, part of how we go about this is one of the things about Team 8 and how we try to stay connected is we have something called the Village. It's a group of about 150 CISOs that we get together with on a regular basis and talk to on a regular basis. And so when we think about the themes in the report, and if you read the report, and if anyone's interested, it's available for free on the Team 8 website. And Ken, I can share a link with you afterwards. One of the things you'll see is for each theme, we try to take a couple of different perspectives. We try to take the perspective of why this theme is relevant when Team 8 thinks of it from our attacker hat, all right? If you think about Team 8's legacy, the name Team 8 comes from 8200, which some of you will know is the Israeli Army's sort of rough equivalent of the NSA. Nadav, who's my boss and was the founder of Team 8, was the head of 8200. It's actually really weird. Sorry, we're going to digress for a quick session. All right. So Nadav is a retired general, Israeli Army, head of 8200, the equivalent of NSA. One of the members of Team 8's, the only other part-time partner Team 8 besides myself is Admiral Mike Rogers, who is obviously retired U.S. Admiral, former head of, amongst other things, the NSA. And so there are times when I'm sitting there in between the two of them, and I never have felt so quite like out of place. Like, the thing, what of these 3 things doesn't belong with the others? Sorry, I digress. Okay, so we come from 8200, so there's this attacker's perspective. And so when you read the report, what we try to give you a sense of is what we think are the drivers economically here when we talk to the business customers in this space. We try to give you the view of an attacker of why this space is relevant. And we also try to give you the view from a practitioner. So you'll actually find quotes from a number of different CISOs and others in the report as well. And so, yeah, so like, I mean, and what we try to think about is what are the impacts? So we have a theme. So, okay, so what are impacting things? So like, for example, like, let's talk about smarter security, for example, right? What is smarter security? The reality is any of you that are a CISO or part of the CISO's leadership team, or even in management within anyone's information security organization, the one constant is there ain't enough smart people, right? So smarter security as a theme is really about, as all of these systems are becoming so much more complex at an underlying level, there is this huge expanding market for things to provide orchestration above it, all right? Automation above it, intelligence above it, all right? So you can think about an early case of this was the SOAR market, all right? So if you think about how we would look at a SIM product, in our world, the SIM product is part of the broad topic of security of things. And we can talk more about that later.
Yeah, right,
But
right.
the SOAR product, the orchestration product, is part of smarter security. And so the driver here from a business impact is sort of pretty clear. Every CISO is desperate to figure out how to do more with less. And the more you can get out of machine learning and the technology and not rely on your people, the better off you are. It's not that you want fewer people. It's you want them doing higher value work. And so I'll pause, give you a chance to ask a question. You can't have been going for a bit.
No, it's fine. I think in that space, I mean, for me, like, and again, like this is in the report, or I see this kind of stuff like more down market to some extent, because I'm not just the big banks or little guys. I think smarter security has been challenging for people because automation in and of itself is a sort of a difficult thing to accomplish on your own, unless you have a volume that requires automation, and there's sort of an economy of scale, if you will, to automation. Like, is this task worth taking the time to automate? Do I do it so often that it's worth putting that investment in to create the automation?
I'm gonna flip that on you a little bit. I'm also going to say there are places where automation creates an opportunity to do things that you never would have thought to try to do because they would have been too human intensive. Right. And that automation would allow you to now do this whole new thing, create this whole new capability, but maybe only add 0.5% of a human being.
We've seen a lot of scope, like red teams are being a lot more effective because of automation of red teaming, and because they can do everything instead of having to pick theirs. They can. I see the automation stuff there, right? But I think that the solution to that problem.
But you also see like one of the hottest areas of investment or of from a VC perspective right now in smarter security is the automation of vulnerability management. Right. You've got companies like Vulcan. I think Vulcan raised a $75 million A round or something up there. You got companies that are thinking about this from an infrastructural perspective. You've got companies that are thinking about it from an application perspective. And so it's a whole, like SOAR, we've been talking about automating your SOC for a bunch of years. But now you've got all this investment in saying, okay, understand pain points. Okay, we all suck at vulnerability management. Let's create automation and vulnerability management. We all are not good at identity management. Okay, let's find ways to do better jobs of doing identity management. And you have, like, especially in the cloud space, you have tiny startups like Untitled.io that are trying to help people figure out ways to understand and automate and manage entitlements in the SaaS environments. And so this theme that we talked about 2-3 years ago, thinking about just SOAR, is now sort of, you've got the VC community sort of hunting down pain point area by pain point area by pain point area and building companies to try to automate those pain points. And so if you're challenged with inventory management, you've got Axios and you can go talk to them about inventory management. And so one of the other things you'll find, like if you want to take, if someone takes a choice to read through the report, is for the different topical areas, we do list out some sort of examples of both public companies and up and coming private companies that align with those themes. Right.
Yeah, I guess I just feel like there's, and again, I agree with what you're saying, but I think there's been a lot of success of what I'll call like the Centaur model, like where there's good tech and a certain amount of human oversight, like a Crowdstrike model or things like that, where, and the net of it is, as a consumer, you're getting better security because they're carrying the ball a lot further, right? They're not leaving it to you. When vendors sell me something and they start telling me an AI story about how it's going to come into my organization and like get smart over time, I almost inevitably feel like that doesn't deliver as I expected.
But so here, I'll push back a little bit on that. Crowdstrike is an ML solution.
Right. But it's
So
part
why?
of
So
their,
why?
yeah, but
So,
no, but
so
they have ML inside their space, but they also have people, they have structures, like they're owning that problem, which I think is
yeah. And can you actually
excellent,
turn
right?
your camera off?
Yeah.
No, I agree, but I mean, and that's why it'll be interesting to see if some of these companies in the VC space really actually find out that they're able to execute in large scale production enterprises. That's
Right.
always the interesting thing as a venture capitalist is, especially like in Teammate's case, we make seed round investments, which means you don't have any customers yet, or we make A round investments, which means maybe you're around $1 million, maybe not even $1 million ARR yet. So you haven't necessarily proven yet that your tech will work in a large enterprise. And that's going to be an interesting thing to observe. But for
Isn't that your
me,
job?
like,
Isn't that why they hired you, so that you could tell them how to make it work at a large enterprise? Isn't that like your
yeah, no, that's
teammate
part of
role?
what, yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's part of what we do. But there's also, I think as a consumer, I think the thing to have some hope in is, okay, there are right now, rough guess, 10 very early stage companies in automating vulnerability management. Let's say 8 out of 10 get it wrong and die. But if 2 out of the 10 actually get it right and bring a product to market that can help both small enterprises and large enterprises really do vulnerability management right, that would be brilliant. All of us would be better off that way. And
Sure, yeah.
so, yeah, I hope that the companies we make a bet on wind up the winners. The realities of venture capitalists, I mean, I think good VCs expect like 1 out of 10 companies to turn into to just skyrocket. Sorry, 50% of the companies go dead, and 40% of the companies are nice and they make some money on. And if they have that kind of mix, they're going to be really happy. Because the one that skyrockets will more than pay for the 10 or the 5 that they write off. And
So how do you not buy one of the losers? I mean, so what? I mean, now you're opening an interesting can of worms, which is at what time do you look at an innovator and say it's safe to buy as a consumer?
Yeah, and so that's really interesting, and I actually think this is where companies like Gotham can help small and mid-sized enterprises have capabilities a little bit more like what I had at Citi. So like when I was at Citi, I had a whole lab in Tel Aviv, and they started with 500 companies a year. And my goal was for them to take that sieve down to 2 or 3 companies to introduce into production every year. All right. But I had a capability that very few companies in the world can have. And so I was better able to manage that risk, all right, by getting much more intimate with the vendors. Realistically, I don't think small and mid-sized enterprises can do that. I think they need to find good partners to work with that have the resource to be looking out at the startup community, to have a sense of what's coming and to track it, and to help their clientele make good bets. All right. I think that's part of the value proposition, like you and Gotham bring your customer base. I think like me at Citi, I didn't need that because I had a lab, but very few people can afford to build a lab. All right.
You had a lab in Israel. I mean, you were like testing the stuff that was coming off the presses.
Yeah, I had a lab in Israel, but I mean, let's be honest, I had 2,000 plus people. I mean, I was one of, I mean, like Citi, B of A, JP, I mean, Wells, I mean, there are a handful of monstrously big security programs, right? you shouldn't design most companies trying to look like those big ones, because you can't afford it and you don't have an appropriate risk profile to justify it. But that's where relying on partners can help. And the truth is, even smart partners can make bad bets, all right? You may have made the bet on Betamax, and even though it was the right technology to bet on, the business environment around it picked VHS, all right? And so you may sometimes make the right technological bet, but you may have picked the wrong company. And the reality is, if you, as a CISO, choose to be an early adopter, you have to live with a little bit of that risk. And you just have to say you're balancing that risk off of earlier access capabilities.
Yeah, but it's important to balance that business. I have this conversation with people. They're doing bake-offs between two A and B, let's say, whatever, and they decide that A has better technology and they're going to go with A. And I say, but B is a much stronger organization. And I said, look, think of it this way. Think of it that you're going to buy $1 million in stock in either company A or company B, because that's how much you're spending on this product. That's the investment you're making. I'm like, and you need these, and basically it's a 5-year, let's call it a 5 to 7 year investment, hopefully. Like, which company do you want $1 million in stock in? Because if the answer is, I'd much rather have $1 million in stock in company B, then maybe that overrides your technology rubric on, the exact way you want to work that out.
I think certainly if in a tie or if things are close, that would absolutely be true. Because and the same is true like on the VC side. I mean, as a VC, you often make the bet on the founding team. All right, the strength of the company as much as the product. If you're a CISO looking at early companies, a strong company is really important because they're more likely to be there 2 years down the line when you continue to need them, rather than to have either gone out of business or been absorbed in some bigger giant and have their evolution stall. The other thing is, if there's a gap, the odds are the company with the stronger management team will be able to close that gap. All right. A weaker management team isn't going to catch up to someone that's a market leader. A stronger management team will eventually catch up and surpass a tech leader if they don't have a strong leadership team as well.
Sure. I want to steer us back to your themes, because I want to talk about, see if we hit all of them a little bit, but
Sure.
The next one I have on my list is resilience and recovery. And I have had this conversation about, like, I told you, like, basically I just need to figure out how many pallets of rubric I need per day. I mean, like, people are just really moving to this, like, heavily this sort of space. I mean, what do you think is innovative about it? Like, is it innovation, or is it just realizing tape is dead?
Well, so, I mean, first of all, there are other aspects to innovation in the space beyond just rubric. And the other thing to think about, and this is true for VC in general, is when you look at a company, there are some things that are some forms of innovation that are stepwise, that are evolution, and there are some that are revolution. All right, some that just break the mold and go in a whole different way. Rubric is evolution. It's not revolution. But I think it's also important to think that the whole space is actually really bigger, we think, than just backup. All right. Recovery is difficult. All right. Backup is easy. All right. But understanding from a business perspective what needs to be backed up, and having process around that, that's a whole stuff you have to think about. doing things like war games is a part of resiliency and recovery. And for example, I don't know that there are any publicly traded companies yet, but there are growing private companies where their whole product is we give you a tech platform to do corporate war games on.
Right.
Like there's a company called Immersive Labs out of the UK. I remember using them when I was at Citi because we used them for together with the regional banks, central banks. We did a war game in Africa, and Immersive Labs provided the technology for all the people in 9 different countries to participate. This was part of what we were doing with the Commonwealth. So yeah, the companies that have got a lot of growth here. I don't think buying storage just and thinking that that's or more secure backup is the answer. It isn't. There are all sorts of much more devious attacks that you could have all the secure backup you want, that they'll still take you down. Most people don't even understand what to back up. I mean, I bet 90% of the pallets you buy for other customers, they're backing up their databases. I mean, how many of them are thinking about Active Directory and network configurations, and router configurations and firewall configurations? How many of them are thinking about the process to reestablish user identity if your whole authentication infrastructure gets rebuilt from scratch? All right. How do you reset the passwords for your entire company at once? Right. I mean, so there's a lot of complexity in this space. And so
no, I agree. You have to drill it. I mean, if you don't,
yeah,
if you're not running drills, because when somebody hands you a whole big pile of like, virtual machines, like what are you gonna? You don't even have a VMware infrastructure. Like, what exactly are you gonna do with all that, right? Like, how does it all work? Yeah. So systems dependencies are critical. I agree.
Yeah, and practicing and making sure that you sort of think broadly about what does it take to what does recovery really mean? It's a side note, but if this is a topic people are interested in, there's this thing called, I think it's called the Business Resiliency Council, and they recently published a draft operational resiliency framework. It's sort of meant to be something like an industry version of NIST cybersecurity, but for resiliency.
Right.
And a bunch of the banks were involved. Team8 was actually involved. It's a nonprofit org. People are interested in the topic. It's just an interesting thing to go learn about. But
yeah, I think I mean, to me, like the NIST stuff, it gets challenging because you get into this structure of like, well, I can tell you how to back up. Show me your NIST framework. Show me your application settings. Show me your stuff, how you've documented all that stuff. And the truth is, for most people, that's like they've made an attempt, but you wouldn't want to hang your hat on it in terms of a recovery.
Yeah, no,
like
and I think that's true for everyone because let's be honest. I mean, every recovery plan starts with inventories, and I've never met a large enterprise that had perfect inventories.
Right.
So all of these things are best effort.
Right. Which is why that whole, like, I prefer these solutions to be sort of fat, dumb, and happy. Like, you just get me everything. Like, not make me be smart, because I'm not going to be that. We're just not that smart on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, no, and it sort of goes. There are a whole bunch of companies that come talk to us saying what they do is a really good job of finding problems. And I'm always very skeptical at investing in companies that only find new problems, because all I can think of is the CISO who says, oh crap, just more work.
Right.
So do I really want to buy a product that's going to get me more work? Now, if you find problems and give me a way to then fix them, yeah, let's have a conversation.
Right.
All right, but just dropping more stuff on my lap really just feels like playing Russian roulette.
Yeah. So let's go to security of things, because it's your next thing. And
Yeah.
obviously these are all things people have been talking about for a long time. IoT, what they're doing, but like what are the innovations? Like what are we hoping? Where are the gaps, and what innovations are we hoping in that space?
Yeah. So I mean, so security of things for us is really sort of interesting because it's actually a bunch of different spaces. All right. In the way we think of things, security of things is everything that connects to the network. And so in a sense, my laptop here is part of how we think of security of things. And so you can think of security of things as of 3 layers. There is security of things where things are really all the traditional things we know and love, like laptops and PCs and the like. There is security of things where we are talking about really heavy duty industrial control systems. And then there's the security of things, which let me sort of describe as all the consumer things,
Right.
the smart TVs, the smart light bulbs, the smart whatever. So, I mean, part of what's, driving innovation here is just the acceleration in the number of things we're even considering. So there's the whole growing market around the heavy duty industrial control things. All right. And that's a space, quite honestly, most CISOs have never looked at.
Right. You either know what SCADA is or you do not. Like that's right.
Yeah, and in some cases it's your responsibility and you just ignore it. And in some cases, if you try to get close to it, someone would chase you away saying, "This is mine, keep your hands off of it."
Right.
Because they'd be afraid you're going to break it. And so this is actually,
but if you're a utility, it's job one. But yeah,
right.
To your point, like
and
there's
this is
certain
actually
places where.
And this is actually an area where there's been a huge amount of sort of innovation in the underlying use cases, which is forcing innovation in the actual security technology. All right. If you think about the whole, and especially given where we started today, thinking about Russia and Ukraine, if you think about the whole migration to the smart grid, all right, that's scary as heck in a lot of ways if you were a paranoid cyber person. All right. Now, the truth is, from a nation energy security perspective, the smart grid is critical and fundamental. All right. But it's all this new technology coming into this really sensitive area with a very active adversary with real world consequences. And so we think it's just that coming together of forces that makes this thing an area of focus, innovation, and growth. On the more traditional space, I don't know that there's a huge amount of true innovation, other than I think more and more machine learning and AI coming in to play a leading role. And I think those that do it well, like, for me, and see, like, this would be like one of those interesting conversations we just had. Would you recommend CrowdStrike or Deep Instinct? And for everyone on this call, these are Charles's personal opinions used for demonstration purposes only. They're not recommendations on products to buy.
Right.
CrowdStrike versus Deep Instinct. All right.
Would I recommend? Which one do I recommend?
Yeah.
Well, obviously,
my guess is you recommend CrowdStrike.
CrowdStrike, right? CrowdStrike is the simpler play for the majority of my customers. It's
Yep.
broader, it's commercially accessible, and you're getting me in trouble also now with Deep Instinct because I'm gonna get hate mail the rest of the day. So yes, I think CrowdStrike
Deep Instinct,
is
the Deep Instinct, and so the thing is, the truth is, the answer is they're both great products. What you recommend depends on whom you're recommending it to and what the rest of they've got.
Right.
I would say personal opinion, Deep Instinct today is more innovative. Crowdstrike is more acquisitive.
Right.
They're in different places in their company's growth patterns. And they are different levels of maturity from a customer interaction and customer support perspective and the like. But I'd say it's in how well we use machine learning and AI, where in the more traditional space, the real innovation evolutionary is happening. And so that's a little bit about this space.
No, I think it's true, but again, you kind of put yourself along a risk as the innovation pipeline as a company or as a CISO or as anybody about like where do you want to live in terms of cutting edge versus safety versus stuff that's just too old, right? I mean, I know people who have McAfee, they're dying to stand McAfee. They're ready to find something new, and whether that's CrowdStrike or Deep Instinct or whatever. But
yeah, so, no,
but I like your security of things concept. I like this breaking it into buckets because the hackers like turning my living room light on and off. That's a little bit annoying, but turning off the power supply. Or also, I think to me the medical stuff scares the heck out of me too. Both, both because there's serious issues, and I just think the hospitals aren't. I don't know if there's not hospital customers on the phone. They're not all very cyber savvy in terms of that kind of stuff.
No, and it gets worse and worse if you think about as medical technology evolves, and you think about embedded devices inside of human beings that will have some form of near field Bluetooth connectivity so that they can be managed. I don't even want to go there.
Yeah.
So let's go from that tiny little view of the world to a really big view of the world. So like the fifth theme is perimeterless world.
Right.
I think this is sort of obvious to everyone. I mean, if you've not been in a cocoon the last 2 years, I mean, the nature of the world has just changed. I mean, and the truth is, perimeterless world is not a new topic. It's not something that's specific to work from home and COVID. Perimeterless world began at some level as soon as we started really sort of opening up our firewalls, outsourcing, but with SaaS, with cloud, with work from home, I dare you to tell me you know the edge of what, when I started in cybersecurity 30 years ago, what my network boundary looks like. And so that drives a lot of different kinds of changes at a lot of different levels. So like for us, when you think about some of the companies that we talk about in the space, they may not necessarily seem obvious, but authentication in a lot of ways is at the core of the perimeterless world. All right. It's at the core of zero trust. I mean, we talk about zero trust, but zero trust really is no trust. We validate everything. Everything is identified uniquely. Everything is authenticated before we connect to it. And so that for us says that at the core of perimeterless world is authentication. And so you'll hear us talk about companies like Okta and the like when you talk about authentication. But you'll also, authentication obviously hits into lots of other spaces. And there'll be smaller startups that you'll see. The perimeterless world also means other things, like how do you think about securing all of that connectivity? All right. And so whether it's from a network layer where you look at some of the, let's say, newer but big companies like Zscaler obviously plays a role in here, or if you think about from an endpoint, some of the small startups like Talon and Island that are looking at hypersecure browsers. All right.
Right.
Some of us may be old enough to remember the pain of Bromium and some of those products. The sort of end evolution of some of that in what is hopefully now truly usable technology is in these hypersecure browsers. And you have companies like Talon and Island that come into space. And so
I think it's hard to innovate. I was just saying it's hard to be an innovator in a space like this because you're not just like, you're in the center of all the operations, whether it's identity, this network stuff, and you're in the center of user experience. You're touching every session, these new ZTNA products, and like this new identity products. Like, it's different from, sometimes we see these technologies and they're like, just give me a mirror report on your perimeter, I'll tell you smart stuff. I'm like, okay, when if you fail, you fail, but like, it's no big deal. That you've got to trust this company to be right in the core of your and user experience, right in the core of your structure.
And there are going to be a lot of companies, because there is not one company that is the perimeterless world company. If you think about all of the capabilities you need to make this theme a reality, you're not going to find one company that does it. I mean, Palo most probably is as close as you get, and they still would only be a small piece of it. All right. And so this is, as you were describing it, Ken, it's at the center of so much. But this is where good advice and good architecture comes into play, because you're going to have to pick individual piece parts, and you're going to have to make the right decisions about what collection of piece parts works best for you. And I don't know that the answer, well, I'm pretty sure that there is no one right answer when you ask that question. And that's, again, where you need good partners and advisors to help you, or you need a 200-person engineering team like I had.
Right.
So I know we're running short on time. The two other themes.
There's some summaries on those, sure.
Yeah. So data security is, if you think about it, and you think about perimeterless world, in the long run, it's all about data. All right. None of what we do, in a sense, matters if it isn't at the end really, in a sense, about the data. And so privacy regulation has driven a large part of the work in the space. Companies like Big ID are big in the space. Obviously, all the legacy data protection stuff is in the space, like all the crypto stuff, the Varonis's of the world. But to me, where the innovation in this space comes is in the handful of companies that are emerging in the space of privacy preserving encryption. And in a sense, what I really mean by that is we figured out how to encrypt data in storage, pretty easy. We figured out how to encrypt data in communications, pretty easy. In a large sense, from a business perspective, those are both useless, right? Because when the business needs the data, it's in a machine being operated on unencrypted, all right? So the real innovation here is going to come from the companies that start to help businesses operate on data while still preserving its privacy. And you'll see companies, I'll say, prejudice, duality from the teammate space that are doing lattice encryption based homomorphic encryption in a sense in this space. And that's going to be where the real innovation comes in this space. And for CISOs, I think this is great, because this is an opportunity for CISO to introduce a technology that could actually create new business opportunities for your business partners. If you want to talk more about that, that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
The last theme quickly is shift left. All right. I had a good AppSec program when I was at Citi. I had a great AppSec program when I was at Citi. Roberto Armenteros, wherever in the world you are, your ethical hacking team was my favorite thing in the world when I was still working. And those AppSec teams were built way back in the world when we did waterfall app dev, right? And then we started to strain those app dev teams as we started to move into more of a continuous development process with sprints. And instead of once a quarter releases, you were doing releases, depending on the sprints, maybe once a month, once a week, whatever. And app dev security was straining. And now you've got cloud and DevOps and DevSecOps. And how the heck, as the AppSec team, do you make sure all the right stuff is happening? And so shift left is all about how do you push all the right things left earlier into the app dev process? There's aspects of this that's also smarter security. When you look at some of the companies in this space, they're really bringing machine learning to bear to help you think about, for example, does this piece of code require a code review, or can it go into production? Does this need a VA test, or can it go? So shift left is everything about how do we bring security more natively, much more early into the application development process in light of DevOps, et cetera.
Yeah, I agree. I think automated code review is something some people are used to because they may not do internal app development. But essentially, if you're moving to cloud, you are moving to DevOps and code as infrastructure, and that works. So you've got to develop an ability to do automated code review because you're doing it whether you like it or not. Like that's just part of your cloud deployment. But all right, so I know we're about done here. I don't know if anybody we just talked, we didn't open the mics at all for questions. Is there anybody that has any questions about any of the stuff we talked about? No. I'm going to make one comment. I had this conversation because it's about your data security question. I was like, people are like talking about encryption. I'm like, encryption is not the problem. Key management's the problem. Like that, I think that's where the innovation has to come. The key management is just something. And again, it's something that a lot of organizations don't have internal expertise at yet. And as encryption becomes more prevalent and keys expand, I mean,
the bigger thing, quite honestly, is at some point in time, quantum computers become a real thing. And then every key management system in the world today stops working. And so finding what the next signing algorithms, tracking if you aren't paying attention to what NIST is doing about what the post-quantum algorithms are going to look like, and then figuring out how will you have the agility to migrate as quickly as you can from one set of algorithms to the other. That's going to be another whole thing in this space. But that's, again, a topic for another day.
Okay, excellent. Well, I want to thank you, Charles, for coming on and sharing such a broad range of topics and helping us get ready for all these changes that are coming. And I want to thank everybody who joined us for coming in. And if you have, as always, if you have any questions or problems, I will get that link from you, Charles, for the report. Make sure it gets all the attendees on the call. And I'll see you guys all next month for our next Tech Talk. Thank you. Have a great day, Charles. Everybody else, thanks.
Thanks. Cheers. Thanks, everyone.